Hey again everyone, I'm back with another video for you, and today I want to share with you my reading wrap up for the month of March. month of March. This will be without the middle grade books. I participated in a readathon during the month of March where I was reading a lot of middle grade books. I've done a separate wrap up video for those books. So these books that I'm going to share with you now are the other books that weren't included in that. And just like my other wrap-up videos, I'm going to do it a little bit piecemeal because most of the books that I get are from the library. So when I finish a book, I need to tell you about it or I will not have it to show you. So let's get right into it. The first book that I finished in March was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This book blew my mind. It's the story of a guy who is assaulted and knocked out and wakes up from this assault surrounded by people in hazmat suits, and they know him, but he has no idea who they are. And the more he goes through this life, he realizes that it's very different than the life that he had prior to him being knocked in the head. So he is very concerned and he's trying to get to the bottom of it. And that is when the madness ensues. This blew my mind. It was wonderful. It's a science concept. In fact, I think it's actually it's fiction, thrillers, technological. And the science is not too much over my head, so I was able to understand most of it. But it was a really good read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The ending was a little underwhelming, let's put it that way. But I gave this book, I believe, 4 stars. The second book that I finished in the month of March was The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I loved this book. Neil Gaiman has a way of just telling a story and getting you sucked in and waiting for the weirdness and the wild madness to start. And this book was no exception. It's a very small book. It's only about 180 some odd pages and 181. And so it went very quickly. In fact, I listened to it on audio and Neil Gaiman actually narrates it. So it's really cool to hear him tell his own story. I'm not going to go into a lot of details because if I tell you everything about all of these books, it's going to be, this video will be forever. But magical realism, weird stuff, little kids, monsters, kind of. If you like that kind of weird stuff, check out this book. The next book that I finished in March is another one that I've been trying to read for quite a while, and that is The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This book was amazing. That's all I can say. It was very, very hard to read at times. In fact, I had to stop and put it down and go read something else or go do something else because I was literally getting upset reading it. It was so heart-wrenching. And the stories, the people, the themes, marvelous book. If you like historical fiction, you should check this out. Be prepared. It's kind of, as you can imagine, it would take your heart sometimes, but it's a very important book, and I'm glad I read it. The next book is one that I'm so glad to be finished, although I really enjoyed it. It's The Alamo by Lon Tinkle. This is a book that I picked up at the gift shop at the Alamo in June 1983. I was 13 years old, just a little kid on a family vacation, and I bought this book. Never read it until now. I've tried to read it a few times, and as with a lot of nonfiction, historical nonfiction, it got a little dry, and so I just really wasn't able to get into it. But this time, for some reason, I really did. It was a little slow because look how small the print is. That's just tiny, and it's not that long. It was only 176 pages, but it's still read long. But I really learned a lot, and I really am glad that I finally finished this book. But it was, if you can find it and you like this time period in American history, check it out. You'll learn a lot. Next is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I really enjoyed this book. I wasn't sure because I'm not really much on science fiction-y stuff, although I used to really like a lot of science fiction, but lately I've been reading more historical fiction and becoming obsessed with Outlander, you know that. But I've heard that this was just a really good character-driven story, so I wanted to give it a try, and it did not disappoint me. I think I ended up giving this 4 stars. I'm not quite sure, but I loved this book. Becky Chambers writes I loved her writing style. I loved the characters. I laughed at times. I cried, and it was just a really enjoyable book. Okay, and the next book that I read in March was All the Missing Girls by Megan Miranda. This is a mystery thriller kind of book that I haven't read a thriller in a while, and I was really kind of craving that, and I really enjoyed it. It had a nice little twist. I was not expecting some of it. Some of it I kind of figured out, but it did hold my attention. It surprised me at the end, and that's what you want in a thriller. You want something that surprises you. Now, the last book, normal book, sorry. This lighting is terrible. It's afternoon again, and excuse the mess behind me. I'm reorganizing stuff. The last regular book that I read, and I'll explain that in a few minutes, in March was I finally finished Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I did not fly through this book, as you know. It took me a while. But by the time I finished it, I felt so in love with these characters. And that's not something that I experienced the first time I tried to read it. In fact, I DNF'd it about 100 pages, 80 pages in, because it was just not my cup of tea. Sometimes when you put something down for a while and then pick it back up later, it clicks with you that second time, and that's what happened when I picked this back up, and I started back from the beginning and reread that, and then I was just sucked in. And I took my time with it. I wanted to enjoy it. The writing was beautiful, flowery, descriptive, just beautiful writing, and I do want to read more of hers. I understand that this is not her best work. Not that this isn't good, don't get me wrong, but she has other books that are even better than this, so I do want to read more from her. Okay, right after I completed the first portion of this wrap-up video and I did my March TBR, I found out about a readathon, another readathon other than the middle grade March that I was already participating in, but another readathon that was the last 2 weeks of March called All the Short Ones, and it was hosted by Jessica at Novel Cravings, and I'll put her link down in the description. And this was a challenge to read books under 300 pages, or as close to 300 pages or less that you could get, or fewer. I always get those mixed up, but it's fewer than 300 pages. Yeah, I'm the grammar queen. And there were daily Instagram photo challenges. I participated in some of them. I didn't participate in all of them. But then there were 7 reading challenges throughout the 2-week period. So 2 of the books that I read for this readathon crossed over for my middle grade. So I'm going to mention those in both wrap-ups. So let me get these out of the way and bring these over here. And I did not completely finish the challenges because there was one book that I didn't finish. But oh well, I still read 6 books in a 2-week period in addition to the other books that I read. And so the first challenge was to read, I've got my notes here, sorry. I've got to read a book by a new to you author. I have never read anything by John Green, so I read Turtles All the Way Down. I understand now why he is so popular. And even though I'm moving away from a lot of YA books, the ones that are really, really good just suck me in. And that's what happened in this book. This is the story of Asa, and she is a 16-year-old girl, I believe. 16. And she... Well, I know, Teddy. Did you enjoy reading the book too? We did it as a buddy read. He's so funny. Asa has a very interesting life. She suffers from multiple disorders. I know, Teddy. It's okay. She has OCD. She has ADHD. She has lots of different issues. And as someone who has ADHD and OCD tendencies, she also has panic disorder. So do I. I really related to a lot of the stuff in this book. Are we finished? We may not be finished. I don't know. I'm sorry this lighting is so bad, guys. I got a late start on everything. In fact, this video is going to be up late, but sorry. Back to the book. I really enjoyed it. I will definitely read more John Green in the future. The next book that I read, well, the next challenge was, I'm going to combine these two because they're a book and its sequel. Read a graphic novel and then read a book with a one-word title. I read Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. I'm sorry. I know I'm butchering that. This I read as the book with a one-word title. And I read Persepolis 2 as the graphic novel, even though these are both graphic novels. This is the story of actually, these books, these two were, I believe, originally one book, and then they were separated into 4 books, and then in the English translation, it was originally written in French. The English translation, I believe you can get it as a bind up with all 4 of them, and this one has the first 2 in this book, the second 2 in this book. It's the story of a young girl who grows up in the midst of the revolution in Iran, and tells basically her story from going to school all the way up to, as like elementary school as a young child, all the way up to going to school abroad because her parents wanted her to be away from the unrest at home. So she went to school away from her parents and saw the freedoms that everyone, especially women, had in other countries, and then came back to Iran and went to college, and just her life and her struggles and her family's struggles. And I was enchanted with her. Some of the things were really kind of shocking, but she and I are about the same age. She was, I think the first date that she gives in here is like 1979, and no, I'm sorry, 10 years old in 1980. And I was 10 years old in 1980, so I'm not sure exactly where our birthdays are. I'll have to look that up. But I remember some of these things from my childhood. But it was interesting really to see it from the perspective of someone who lived it and lived in that fear. And I'm glad I read it, and I really enjoyed the graphic novel aspect of it. I don't read many graphic novels, so I might have a new genre to read. Teddy is just having a ball over here, aren't you, buddy? Are you having fun? He is so funny. Okay. The next book, or the next challenge, was to read something that I'd read before. And for that, I chose Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. I will talk more about this in the middle grade March wrap-up video. But I'm sure everybody knows the story of Wilbur and Charlotte and Templeton, the rat, and all of the geese and the other farm animals at Zuckerman's farm. One of my favorite books in the world. So then the next challenge was to read a book to movie adaptation, and I read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This also is a middle grade book that I'll talk more about in the wrap up for that. I wasn't as impressed with this as I have been other Gaiman books. I've really enjoyed reading him lately. This one just didn't do it for me. I think I gave this like 3 stars, and I'm sorry, I should probably tell you my ratings on these, but I read a lot of books. It's hard to keep track of all of these things. So, Coraline, I've not seen the movie. I might. Maybe I will kind of enjoy the movie a bit better, but I gave this 3 stars, I believe. And then the next challenge was to read a nonfiction book, and I read 10% Happier, How I Tamed the Voice in My Head, Reduced Stress Without Losing My Edge. Sorry. and found self-help that actually works. A true story by Dan Harris. Dan Harris is an ABC news anchor who had a panic attack on live TV. And then after many attempts to resolve that issue, discovered meditation. And I originally got interested in this book after talking with my counselor about it, or about meditation. And I like Dan Harris. I watch ABC News, and I wanted to give it a shot. I think I really wanted this to be more of the techniques of meditation, not necessarily just his story about why it works for him, which I was glad to read. But the last few pages of it, like the last, let's see, maybe 10 pages, it gives kind of like instructions on how to meditate, which is really what I was hoping to get more from. Having said all that, I really did enjoy the book. He's hilarious. He told some really interesting stories about things that happen at the news, and I was really glad to read it. And I know there's a sequel, and I think it actually has more techniques in it. So maybe some point in time I'll read it. Now, the last challenge for the All the Short Ones readathon was just read 7 books. So read a book of my choice. And I didn't finish it, but I will power on. I'm still trying to get through The Handmaid's Tale. I got about a third of the way through it during the readathon, I believe, but I just couldn't push through and finish it. So this is in my April TBR, and I'm almost done with it. Yay! So those are the books that I read during the month of March. I had a lot of fun. I read some really interesting books, and I will see you next time in either the middle grade March wrap-up or my new TBR. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up and hit subscribe so that you will never miss out on anything that we're doing here at my channel. So thanks so much for watching. Fly high, Pooh Bear.